Chapter 1, A Gift. Ha! A handsome young man sighed as he chewed on a stalk of grass and looked toward the horizon. Wulong, ah Wulong. And you are called God by so many people? How laughable! He said out loud with a self-deprecating smile. He sat on a cliff near a mountain peak and watched as the beautiful scenery around him was consumed by darkness as the space itself cracked and broke into pieces. What he was witnessing was a once-in-a-billion lifetimes event, so rare that it could be counted on one hand throughout all of cultivation world history, the destruction of a minor world. It was also the first of its kind that did not happen naturally and was instead induced artificially, as normally even the most powerful people in all of 7 boundless worlds combined did not have the ability to completely destroy an entire minor world. Unfortunately for him, the fee for viewing such a rare show was his life, as one had to be inside the said world to witness its collapse, and even as powerful as he was, he could not survive the collapse of the world he was in. The reason he was in this situation was because he was betrayed. His own disciple disclosed the location where he was going to attempt a breakthrough, and his most powerful enemies conspired to use a unique and priceless treasure to destroy the minor world to bring him down. In fact, the treasure in question was suspended above him, releasing a massive amount of energy in formless ripples, destroying this world. It was one of the 4 primordial artifacts, the most powerful artifacts in the known universe, an ancient and exquisite jade pagoda, that was currently covered in cracks. Only the self-destruction of such a powerful treasure was able to cause the demise of this minor world. To kill one person, a treasure of this caliber was sacrificed and an entire minor world was brought down along. This showed how wary of him were his enemies. Young man. Suddenly, a voice entered his ears. He looked behind him to find a plain-looking woman in her 30s standing not far from him. Wulong was not surprised to see her as he knew that she lived in a bamboo hut near the peak of the mountain he was sitting on. And he could sense her approaching the moment she stepped out of her dwelling. My apologies, my lady. When I asked if I could use your mountain to cross my tribulation, I did not expect to bring a calamity to your peaceful life here. Wulong said with an apologetic look. Don't worry about that, I guess you could say that you brought some excitement along. The woman replied, seemingly unconcerned about the destruction of the world around him. There was an apathetic look in her eyes that seemed to be filled with inexhaustible boredom. Wulong pondered about the mysterious woman as he could not figure out her identity. When he first met her while looking for an ideal spot to cross his tribulation, as feng shui and abundance of spiritual qi were very important for such occasions, he thought of her as a mortal woman. He could not sense any spiritual qi or aura of a cultivation technique, not even a hint of any power. Even the most powerful people in the 3 divine realms, the last great realm of cultivation, could not hide their cultivation in front of him, so he did not doubt this judgment. He of course thought of how odd it was for a mortal to be able to live out here in this secluded minor world with no other people living in it, but she could very well have accidentally fallen into a wormhole and be stranded here, so he decided not to bother with it as he was not very interested in the affairs of mortals, especially since she declined when he asked her if she needed any help. But seeing her so casually brushing off the situation somehow got him to think that this woman was not so simple. Excitement? Haha, well, I guess dying along with one of the 4 primordial artifacts could be called exciting. At least I can brag about that. Wulong said with a wry smile. 4 primordial artifacts? Ha 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 ha, young man, there are only 3 primordial artifacts, and their power is far beyond this toy here. The woman laughed softly, seemingly hearing a good joke after years of boredom. Wulong widened his eyes in surprise when he heard her reply. He stood up, throwing the stalk of grass he was chewing on away, and faced her. You mean to say that this pagoda is not a primordial artifact? He asked in bewilderment. Of course, did you think that youngster could detonate one of the 3 primordial artifacts? Not even what you call a true god can do such a feat. This here is something created by the hands of men, while the primordial artifacts existed long before stars were formed in this universe, let alone humans, the woman casually said as if talking about the weather. Wulong could feel his heart trembling. Who is this woman that seemed to know information that exceeded the common knowledge of the cultivation world? She also called the Emperor of the Heavenly Phoenix Empire, one of the most powerful and influential people in all of the 7 boundless worlds, as well as one of the oldest human gods in the known universe. A youngster. The woman looked at Wulong, and despite the latter's ability to look composed regardless of his true thoughts, she seemed to notice the bewilderment in him and smiled. She then looked at him a bit more deeply, and he immediately felt as if she could see through him completely, all his secrets and thoughts, his entire existence laid bare before her. This feeling greatly shocked him as he had not felt like this for so long that he forgot how it felt. Young man, you have inspired curiosity in me for the first time in a long, long time. I can see that despite desperately trying to accept your fate, there is a desire to fight against it and yearning for life. I am curious how someone like you, who seems to have lived a long and fulfilled life, still keeps the heart of a young man, she said with a smile on her face. While she looked plain, there suddenly appeared an indescribable charm to her when she expressed a bit of emotion. Wulong felt mesmerized by that smile, something that does not often happen to him, who have tasted countless beautiful women in the 7 boundless worlds. For a moment, he even forgot the bewilderment he felt from her words. Seeing that dazed look in his eyes, the smile on the woman's face deepened as she felt amused for some reason. She then proceeded to walk up to him. Haha, young man, as a reward for making me interested, something that I did not consider possible anymore, I will give you a precious gift. But it is entirely up to you if you can seize the opportunity that it entails, she said in a soft voice as she stood right in front of him. Hua Wulong quickly snapped out of it, but it was too late. The woman suddenly moved forward, and her soft lips touched his, and his vision rapidly blurred. I hope you will be able to entertain me a bit more, young man, he heard as his consciousness slipped into oblivion. Dash. On a cliff observing the destruction of the beautiful scenery around the mountain, stood a plain-looking woman in her 30s, as white particles scattered before her fading into nothingness. The woman touched her lips and smiled, her appearance suddenly beginning to change. Her features slowly filled with unworldly beauty, and her figure became the masterpiece of the heavens. Her plain white clothes did not take away from her appearance, instead, the simplicity of the clothing accentuated her beauty. The white color seemed to be purified even further under her aura, and it gave her the feeling of a goddess, untainted by the world. It feels so wonderful to not be bored, I have longed for this feeling for so long that I forgot how great it is. She said with a nostalgic look at the horizon wrecked by the chaotic destruction, and then smiled mischievously. Maybe if he can entertain me enough, I can give him even a more special reward, ha 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 ha. By the time the wave of destruction reached the foot of the mountain, she had already disappeared from the spot she was standing on, leaving only lingering laughter and a cracking exquisite jade pagoda on the verge of explosion. Dash. Wulong snapped his eyes open and sat up from a lying position. For a moment a confused and disoriented feeling flashed in his eyes as he gasped for breath, his whole body soaked in cold sweat. What the? Where am I? What is happening? Countless questions and thoughts rushed through his muddled mind, which seemed to be sluggish due to coming out of a deep slumber in mere moments. And then, a sharp light flashed through his eyes as he took a deep breath, instantly calming himself down. He ran through his memory, and to his surprise, learned that he was currently a 16-year-old outer court disciple of a dual cultivation sect named Yin Yang Unity Palace. He was brought into the sect by an outer court elder about 5 months ago, with no recollection of what happened before that. His name was still Wulong, and he even looked exactly like himself when he was 16. His cultivation base was at the second step of body transformation realm, a little worse than most kids at the age of 10, and as good as someone who was just taking his first step on the road of cultivation. The last foreign memory he recalled was being bitten by a highly venomous snake while on a group mission to look for medicinal ingredients on a mountain relatively not far from the sect. After recalling all of this, he was dumbfounded, as he could not comprehend how he ended up in this situation. What did that woman do to me? Who is she? He wondered. Just as he was about to organize his thoughts, the door to the room opened and a middle-aged man walked in. He then noticed Wulong sitting on the bed, and he looked at him with a relieved expression. Disciple Wu, thank heavens the medicine worked, how are you feeling? Wulong quickly recognized the man as an outer court elder working in the medicine hall from his new memories. He then decided not to linger here and find a quiet place to organize his thoughts. Elder Ji, I am okay, thank you. I still feel a little weak, but that should be normal after such deadly venom, so I would like to return to my living quarters to recuperate. Elder Ji looked at him somewhat surprised and nodded his head. Yes, in fact you are quite lucky, as the antidote for this venom works only on 4 out of 10 victims, but as long as you managed to wake up, you are completely out of danger, you may go. Wulong nodded and went to his house that he recalled from the new memories, while Elder Ji went to the center of the sect looking genuinely relieved. Chapter 2, Broken Sword. Wulong went through the outer court and quickly approached a small house with a tiny courtyard on the outskirts of the sect. Because of the nature of the sect, every disciple had their own private dwelling, even if small, as that would eliminate any privacy concerns during their cultivation. As he went into his room, he approached the mirror and closely examined his appearance, confirming that he was essentially just younger, and this genuinely felt like his own body. That woman, did she put me in an illusion? This was his first thought. There were certain constraints on an illusion, and as long as you could even consider a possibility of being in an illusion, you could break it. However, he still thought of a possibility of it being an illusion only because he now understood that the woman he met was someone far more terrifying than anyone he ever knew of, and as such, maybe had the means to bypass the restrictions of illusion with unknown methods. But he quickly discarded this thought as he recalled her words to him. A gift, hey. If he stretched his imagination, this gift would be a second chance, returning him to his younger days, but he never was in this sect. In fact, dual cultivation sects were extremely rare at the time he was young, so much so that not many people knew they existed. The second possibility was reincarnation, and while reincarnation existed as a confirmed fact as it was necessary to contemplate and comprehend samsara on the way of cultivation to immortality, the memories of past life being wiped out was an irresistible law of the universe and no one had the means to resist it, even gods. Let alone keeping memories, no one had the ability to keep track of when or where someone would be reincarnated after their death, as comprehension did not even remotely signify control. However, he could not deny the reality before him, as he indeed had all his memories but was in a younger body that matched his to a hair. This gift, I will have to work hard to be worthy of it. A sharp glint emerged deep in his eyes, and a determination filled his heart. He knew that he encountered an extraordinary chance, albeit not willingly. He, of course, was not without concerns, as there were people left behind that he was worried about, but he understood that worrying about it now would not solve the problem, and the only thing he could do right now was to seize the opportunity before him. Moreover, he had to properly pay back the people responsible for his near demise, so he had to regain his strength. Because of the background I grew up in that did not have a strong cultivation legacy, while I achieved great heights in my past life, it got progressively harder to advance the further I went, as my foundation was already solidified with low-grade cultivation techniques. Now, I have the chance to practice the best cultivation techniques I know right from the start, as well as temper my body at the same time instead of inferior methods I used in the past. In this life, I can achieve even higher heights, and I can do it at unprecedented speed. He grew excited just thinking about the new prospects opened up in front of him. Full W current Nafloes on novelb.com. He then sat down on the bed in a lotus position with closed eyes and spent about 3 hours going through all of his memories and checking the condition of his body. After this, his eyes flashed open and he had a weird expression on his face, while the excitement he felt before was a bit more restrained. "My sword is broken," he said out loud. The most valuable treasure in a dual cultivation sect for a male disciple was the sword between their legs, and his was not able to stand up. When he first joined the sect, because of his overwhelmingly handsome appearance, he was immediately approached by many female disciples who wanted to cultivate with him, but alas, his problem quickly became apparent and the news spread around. Being clueless and without memories also did not help, as he was known to be a silly dumb boy who could not use his thing down there by the second week he arrived. This, coupled his near non-existent cultivation base at his age, quickly extinguished any hopes for him to be able to cultivate with any of the female disciples, and as an outer court disciple, he was quickly abandoned and forgotten by nearly everybody. If not for a few elders who checked in on him and helped him by sending him on minor missions such as the one he was accomplishing when he was bitten by the snake, he would not have enough achievements to even procure food, let alone get cultivation resources. To think I, who was called the god of pleasure, would be in this situation, he smiled wryly. In his previous life he was the target of envy of most men, as he was surrounded by the most beautiful women and held a great deal of influence and power. He had it all. Thus the pathetic state he was in was so vastly opposite that it was quite ironic. However, he was not greatly discouraged, as he knew a lot of ways to improve his condition. He concentrated a bit and recalled one of the best cultivation techniques he knew, the Chaos Refinement Body Tempering Art, a technique he obtained from an ancient clan known as the greatest warriors in the universe at one point in history, the Great Rakshasa clan. They reigned supreme at the time, but a long and intense internal strife brought them down on their knees, and almost all major powers at the time took this opportunity to nearly wipe them out of existence. Despite their efforts, however, no one was able to obtain their most guarded secret, the unrivaled cultivation technique their core members practiced, and even wiping them out proved to be impossible, as they simply closed off in their own world and have been quietly recuperating ever since. It was only eons later that Wulong was able to obtain this technique. Alas, at that time his cultivation was too high to start practicing it, and he could only lament at his misfortune. This miracle of a technique allowed one to refine any energy that they come into contact with to their own spiritual chi, as well as expel all impurities without leaving even a speck behind. Despite taking medicine to counter the venom, there was still a small lingering amount of it as well as the medicine in his body, as not long had passed since he took it. He used this energy as well as spiritual chi in the air to cultivate for nearly all night, tempering his body and cultivation base. The weakness in his body rapidly went away as he felt strength coursing through his body, strengthening it. His current cultivation was at the body transformation realm, the very first step one takes on the road of cultivation, in which the cultivator transforms their body using spiritual chi in the atmosphere, to be able to host spiritual energy inside. As he cultivated, he quickly noticed that the quality of the spiritual chi was astonishingly bad here, not even backwater lands would have it this bad. However, there was not much he could learn just by contemplating, so he decided to focus on increasing his strength first, and learn about his surroundings when he at least has some leg to stand on. By the end of his cultivation, it was already dark outside, and he reached the third level of body transformation realm. This was his first breakthrough since arriving in the sect, as he was not able to cultivate properly before. As a dual cultivator, it is quite fortunate that I ended up in this sect, but with the broken sword, I will not be able to properly cultivate at an optimal speed. I need to resolve this issue first. He thought to himself. As it was already close to night, he decided to make his move first thing in the morning, so he went to the bathroom to clean off the sticky impurities he expelled during his cultivation and went to sleep. Chapter 3, Beauty with a Sword. When he opened up his eyes in the morning, Wulong adjusted himself to the long-forgotten feeling of being slightly sluggish after sleeping. As an immortal, it has been entire dozens of millennia since he last needed to sleep. Afterward, Wulong washed up and went straight to the treasure hall of the sect. Upon arriving in the hall, he saw people lining up in front of a dozen counters. But he instead went to the corner where the information counter was. As most of the people who came here knew what they wanted, this information counter was usually idle, so he didn't have to wait in line and immediately arrived in front of it. "How may I help you?" The female disciple behind the counter livened up after seeing this handsome disciple approach her counter. Wulong smiled charmingly in response. "May I see the catalog with prices?" he asked. "Certainly." Here the female disciple behind the counter blushed as she saw his smile and bashfully handed over a piece of jade to him. While the Wulong before he remembered his past life did not know how to use his handsome appearance properly, the same could not be further from the truth when it came to the current Wulong. His demeanor and gaze alone was able to make the bodies of these girls to heat up. "Thank you," he said and used his spiritual sense to activate the jade. Information poured into his head and he could see all of the items sold in the treasure pavilion and their prices. There were treasure weapons, non-weapon spiritual treasures, pills, medicinal ingredients, minerals and a lot more types of products, but what he focused on were pills and medicinal ingredients. However, he quickly noticed that the pills sold here were not only of low tier but also quite low in quality. He did not notice any decent pills worthy of his attention even after looking through all of the most expensive ones on the list. He then went through the medicinal ingredients and could only find a dozen that he could barely consider, the rest being basically trash in his eyes. He decided to lower his expectations and standards, as even when he started cultivating in his previous life the pills and medicines he consumed were not up to par to his current standards. But even then, the quality of pills and medicinal ingredients he saw on the list was a step or two lower than he would expect of even a low-level mortal sect. This, coupled with the quality of spiritual chi in the environment and the fact that most of the disciples were only at the chi gathering realm, only a realm higher that body transformation realm, while sect elders were at the revolving chi realm, 3 realms higher than chi gathering realm, told him that the quality of cultivation in this place was very low even compared to his childhood in past life. While that was a necessary observation, he decided to focus back on what he came here for, and spotted a few ingredients he found useful. Among them, the best was the scarlet fire ginseng, which was also one of the most expensive items on the list. Scarlet fire ginseng, 25,000 points. He would at most get 20 points from doing his menial missions. Getting 25,000 points was nearly impossible not only for him, but for most of the disciples of the sect. However, he would not be able to cultivate if he did not have it. He thanked the female disciple again and returned the jade to her. He then went for a walk contemplating his next move. Buying the scarlet fire ginseng was essentially impossible, at least not in a desirable time frame, so he could only opt to take a mission to gather medicinal plants outside the sect and go look for it or any substitute. As he was walking, he looked at the female disciples around with indifferent eyes. Even if he managed to repair his sword right now, he would still need a partner to cultivate with. And while he did not particularly mind age difference, that was because his partners were at least 1,000 years old. It would feel weird to cultivate with mortal girls in their teens, but he also understood that he was not in a situation he could be picky in, as no one in his preferred age category would even look at him right now, much less cultivate together. That being said, even if he accepted this, their cultivation bases and potential for growth was quite low, so the efficiency of cultivating with them was not high. He would normally not discriminate based on cultivation and talent, but not in the current situation where he was pressed for time. There was also an option of going for quantity instead of quality, but he looked down on such a method. It did not mean that he wouldn't cultivate with many women, but given his current needs and desired time frame, he would need to go through partners like a conveyor belt, which lacked personal connection and passion in his eyes. There was a time in his youth when he used to cultivate like that, but he have long since decided not to repeat that period ever again. What he sought was to make each of his partners, even those he would only have a one-night stand with, feel as if they are the one and only, the most precious and loved woman at the time of their cultivation. And that required time and attention. That is not to say that he would not enjoy pleasuring multiple partners at the same time, as some women enjoyed his company in a group and he could give them equal attention and affection, but even then he preferred not to go over 10 partners on the bed at the same time as he did not like to have his partners wait for their turn. And the numbers he would require to cultivate efficiently with these disciples would be in the thousands. Thus he would only cultivate with this many partners if he had a lot of time, simply idling and finding pleasure in satisfying each of millions of women over the course of thousands of years. When he required fast breakthroughs, however, he would choose a few high-quality partners to maximize benefits. And he currently was in such a situation. Though, he would of course not refuse someone who wanted to cultivate with him if she did not meet his standards, it's just that he would only do so when he had the time and could give her the attention he believes each of his partners deserves. There were multiple reasons he needed to improve at a fast pace. Firstly, he was currently too weak, and as a person who knew how cruel the world of cultivation was, he knew better than to linger in such a state for long. Secondly, he knew next to nothing about the situation he was currently in, how much time passed since the incident in the minor world that collapsed, where he was, what became of his loved ones, and if they were in any danger. And even if he knew such information, he again needed strength to be able to do something instead of just worrying. And lastly, he knew that his potential at this moment was at its greatest, so he needed to improve at least to a point when he extended this golden period of potential by extending his lifespan. The earlier he can achieve a certain realm, the better. When he was walking by the training grounds, he felt a sharp aura, which led his gaze to one of the training fields where a group of disciples stood before a beautiful woman who looked to be 25 to 27 years old with a stunning figure in sect elder clothes. The woman was holding a sword and seemed to be demonstrating a sword technique to the disciples during a lecture. While Yin Yang Unity Palace was a dual cultivation sect, it was still a cultivation sect nonetheless, so there were naturally lectures on combat skills. When he saw her, something deep within his soul trembled. He stopped walking and quietly watched her delicate features and smooth movements. His handsome appearance coupled with a tranquil and refined aura instantly attracted the attention of the female disciples passing by. Up.dfrm Novel B, I, N.C, O, M. Who is that guy? How come I didn't know about someone like him in the sect? I don't know either. I have never seen him before, otherwise, I would have already got to know him a lot more personally. He is so handsome. I wonder where he was hiding this whole time. The female disciples started murmuring to each other in low voices. That's Wulong, he was quite famous and then infamous a few months ago. Yet, he may look handsome, but I don't recommend getting your hopes up. His cultivation is quite low and his dragon is dead, if you know what I mean. He also has some mental issues if I remember correctly. Yet, I remember him, it's the waste of a handsome face, right? Although, he somehow looks different now. More handsome and cool maybe. Some of the surrounding female disciples recognized him and quickly warned those who were overwhelmed with curiosity. But they also noticed some changes around him. While that was happening, Wulong did not pay any mind to their gossip. His whole attention was focused on the woman gracefully wielding the sword. He watched her in a daze, unconsciously following her every movement with his eyes as he felt a nostalgic feeling for some unknown reason. Chapter 4, Doubts. As he saw her elegant yet strong, gentle yet swift sword movements, an unbearable sadness buried under countless years of attempts to heal surfaced from the depths of his soul. Wulong was astonished. He thought that being as old as he was, the wound his heart bore in his youth would not shake him to his core as it was doing right now. It was inevitable that for immortals who lived so long that millennia were like mere moments and who comprehended the mysteries of the great Daos on their way to immortality, their emotions would become somewhat dull. Not that they do not experience emotions, it is just that their perception towards their own emotions, as well as their way of viewing them, changes qualitatively. It is like a fallen candy might mean the greatest tragedy to a child, but a mere happening to an old man. But the moment he saw her sword, he felt like those years went by in a second, as if just yesterday his heart was shattered into a million pieces, and all of his composure of being thousands upon thousands years old was gone. A precious gift. He recalled the words of the mysterious woman. Is it possible? But if... His mind stirred with thoughts. And for the first time in many millennia he felt genuine fear. Fear that he might be wrong. But what made that fear possible and so acute was actually that glimmer of hope. The woman finished her sword demonstration and started giving instructions to the disciples before her. At the same moment, Wulong also regained his composure, as even with the unbelievable possibility before him and sudden, unexpected assault of intense emotions, he still remained an immortal who lived through millennia. Wulong looked around, and quickly spotted some disciples also spectating the lecture not far from where he was standing. He approached them and asked a female disciple who seemed to look at them from time to time. Hello, do you know who is that instructor? That's Elder Lu, she is one of the best sword instructors in the sect, as well as one of the strongest elders overall. The female disciple he asked eagerly answered him, as she was conscious of his presence ever since he appeared here. Elder Lu? Do you perhaps know her full name? The disciple was a bit surprised by this question, as one normally would not ask for the full name of elders. Calling them by full name would be rude if they are not peers, and even fellow elders would only call each other by surname unless they had a close relationship and were in private, but she still nodded and said, her name is Elder Lu Li. Thank you, he said with a smile, but inwardly his mind raced. Lu Li Hui, so both name and appearance are different, but that feeling. I cannot be certain yet. A handsome male disciple was standing next to the girl he was talking to. In fact, in this dual cultivation sect every disciple and elder had at least above average appearance, and most would be described as top handsome men and top beauties outside of the sect. Of course, not one of the male disciples could hold a candle to the otherworldly appearance of Wulong, hence the predetermined hostility any male disciple held against him even if they never met before. Hey, instead of looking at Elder Lu, shouldn't you be joining your peers there, or is their cultivation too high for you to be their peer? The male disciple asked with a smirk, but inwardly he was annoyed with Wulong getting so much attention from the female disciple he was unsuccessfully courting for the past few weeks. Wulong's high interest in Lu Li, the woman revered by all disciples of he sect, further antagonized him. In the direction the male disciple pointed to with his chin, in another corner of the training field there was a group of disciples of varying age but clearly younger than most of the disciples Wulong have seen before. They were wearing distinct uniforms and their cultivation bases were in the same realm as his, body transformation realm. These were junior disciples that were not allowed to dual cultivate until they reached adulthood at 16 years of age. They also preferably needed to achieve 7th or higher level of body transformation realm by that point, as that was the requirement for disciples that are of age who enter the sect each 10 years. Wulong was, in fact, a somewhat unique existence as the only disciple of age below that cultivation level. Visit No. V. Elb. I. N for the best novel reading experience. Most of the junior disciples there were at least at 5th level now. As dual cultivation depended heavily on the partner's cultivation and talent, having a low cultivation base at his age was a fatal flaw to his prospects, so when the male disciple noticed it, he quickly pointed it out. Wulong did not even look at him, nor did he look in the direction was pointing and proceeded to talk with the female disciple who answered him earlier as if the last few seconds did not happen. If she is one of the strongest elders, why is Elder Lu an outer court elder? He noticed that Lu Li was wearing robes of an outer court elder earlier. The female disciple was a bit surprised by his calm attitude to the ridicule from the male disciple earlier, but she proceeded to explain. Well. Hey. I spoke to you. Are you looking down on me? The male disciple who spoke before furrowed his brows and spoke in a menacing tone, slightly higher than before, interrupting the explanation. Being treated as empty space immediately flared up his anger, coupled with his natural competitiveness, predisposed hostility as well as being an entire realm higher than Wulong caused him to take an aggressive stance. Wulong expressionlessly turned his gaze to the male disciple. I do, he then spoke in an indifferent tone and turned his gaze back to the female disciple, seemingly urging her to go on with his eyes. He didn't lie, he really did look down on him as he easily and accurately saw through the raison for the male disciple's hostile attitude. And men who became indignant when the woman they courted became interested in another man were included in top 10 things he despised with passion. If one could not even court a woman, he had no right to be angry if someone else could. This short response, however, dumbfounded not only both the female disciple and the male disciple, but also everyone whose attention got attracted by the commotion. Why you? The male disciple instantly burst in anger. Do you want to die? It seems to me that you do, said Wulong while his gaze shifted back to the male disciple, but this time it became colder, as he was starting to feel slightly annoyed. Although normally he would completely ignore such a minor nuisance, his emotions were still a bit shaken from before, and he was eager to learn more about Lu Li to clear his doubts, so being interrupted greatly unnerved him. The fact that no one spoke to him in a tone, or dared to interject into his conversations for thousands of years, thus slightly weakening his tolerance to it, did not help. When the male disciple saw his cold ease looking at him, he suddenly shuddered and staggered back only to trip and fall on his butt. His whole body instantly covered in cold sweat. Seeing this, Wulong sighed with a self-deprecating emotion. To be shaken so much that I began bullying children because of a minor nonsense, it seems I need to calm down. I can slowly confirm my doubts as I still have some time in this sect. Whatever the truth is, being impatient might bring worse than desirable outcome. For now, I need to focus on solidifying my foundation. Everything else would be easier resolved after that. He forcefully calmed down his heated emotions and looked at his situation in a cold, calculating, and pragmatic way. In this world, strength was everything. Anything he could achieve now using time, energy, wits, and resourcefulness could be resolved in mere moments with a wave of his hand as long as he put his focus on the right priority. As much as he wanted to run to her and clear his doubts right this instant, he knew his current situation, and also knew what was the most efficient way of going about this. Thus, he sighed, shook his head, said thank you for answering my questions to the female disciple with a gentle smile and walked away, leaving behind a group of dumbfounded disciples who watched his receding figure in a daze. Meanwhile, the disciple sitting on the ground was conflicted as he felt terror, humiliation, and hate at the same time, but the feeling of dread he felt a few moments before caused the first of those three emotions to dominate the other two. Chapter 5, Mission Hall. About a minute of silence after Wulong left, the group exploded with reactions. Who was that guy? He's so handsome. So cool, there is something otherworldly about him. The female disciples immediately began giggling with dreamy expressions. Damn, who is that arrogant fucker? To be so obnoxious while being only at body transformation realm, he doesn't know how high the heavens are. The male disciples were in strong contrast, annoyed and unnerved both by Wulong's attitude and the reactions from the female disciples. How is it even possible for someone at the third level of body transformation realm to be a disciple? Someone asked, and suddenly this question puzzled everyone there. A few moments later, one of the disciples there suddenly made an enlightened face as if he recalled something. I remember him. He is Wulong, the only disciple who got accepted with a cultivation lower than sect standards, he said. Oh, now that you mention him, I remember there was a commotion about it. It is rumored that his background must be quite something, but it never got confirmed. TCH, I guess having great background does give great benefits. He can even be so arrogant while being so weak, one of the disciples said, his voice thick with envy. Background sometimes could be even more important than personal strength, but that of course was limited to the case where personal strength of the opponent was not higher than the strength of one's background. Thus they all dismissed his behavior to his background, while the female disciples, albeit with some reluctance, lost most of the interest as he posed essentially no value in terms of dual cultivation partner. Only the male disciple who met that terrifying gaze knew that they were wrong, but he didn't bother correcting them. Since they did not experience what he has, they would most likely not believe him. He would only risk becoming even more of a laughingstock. Meanwhile, Wulong walked towards the mission hall, as receiving a mission was currently the only way he would be allowed to go outside the sect. While he could try to get that scarlet fire ginseng from the treasure hall, it would take too much time to earn that many points, and it would be much more efficient to rely on his experience and knowledge to find natural treasures that could be of use to him outside. He went to the treasury hall mostly for reference, to confirm the level of medicines and treasures there so he could vaguely judge the overall environment, and knew what to anticipate. Moreover, when he was free to roam, he could continuously find and consume any suitable medicinal ingredients, improving his strength along with his chances of finding more valuable medicines. The mission hall was relatively simple, it only had boards with missions posted on them, and a few counters where the disciples registered for their missions. Wulong casually looked through the board of missions for outer court disciples below the Qi gathering realm, which were mostly medicinal ingredient gathering missions. He then chose one with the reward of 5 points to bring 10 stalks of a low-level medicinal ingredient called white spirit grass. It did not really matter to him which mission he took as long as he could go outside of the sect without much suspicion. He looked towards the registering counters, taking a few moments to concentrate on each of the people working there, and then approached one of the counters with a man in his 40s with a cultivation base at the 7th level of Qi gathering realm who looked quite listless. This man wore robes similar to disciples, but with distinct red lining and a red symbol retainer stitched on his chest, which indicated that he was a sect retainer. There were disciples of sects whose potential stopped very early, mostly a realm higher than new sect disciples, and who could not break through to higher levels for a considerable time, indicating that they most likely reached the peak of their potential. This was the majority of disciples accepted into any sect, as the proportion of people to break through into the next realm would be narrower the higher it was. They would then have to retire as disciples and be forced to decide, to either leave the sect or work in the sect in return for a peaceful and comfortable life. Those who decided to leave were in the majority, sometimes to try and find a lucky chance to break through by finding a rare natural treasure that can help them break their limits, but mostly just to live out their lives outside the sect, free of the restrictions being in the sect entails. The small part who decided to stay and work in the sect would then be called sect retainers. They would be manning the registration counters in various halls such as this mission hall, and doing other miscellaneous tasks. Most of them chose this life because of the sense of security one would have by working in a sect, since as long as the sect was prospering they would never have to worry about finding work, food, and shelter. Some also stayed because of the sense of belonging they have gained and strengthened during the time when they were active disciples. There were also long-term missions for active disciples to do these jobs, as this was also one of the ways for less experienced disciples to earn achievements. But they would usually only occupy less important positions such as information counters and receiving applications without actually processing them. Disciple badge. When the man asked apathetically, Wulong gave him his disciple badge. Which number? The man then asked, seeing that Wulong did not bring the mission notice, which meant that he was here for one of the missions that was permanently on the board, as it was possible to take it as many times as possible. Number 134. 10 stalks of white spirit grass, first tier mission. You will get 5 points per every 10 stalks. If you bring an incomplete badge it will be recorded and included the next time you take this mission. Do you have any questions? The retainer behind the counter spoke in a monotonous voice as if stating words that he knew so well that he could recite them even while asleep. No. The man nodded and recorded the information, took out a fresh scroll where he wrote a few sentences. He then stamped it with a few different stamps and gave it to Wulong along with the disciple badge. This is your mission permit, show this to the guards at the entrance so that you will be allowed to leave. It also proves that you are on a mission while you are outside, so don't lose it. Do you have your own gear? He then asked. No. The retainer then took a wooden token with first tier carved on it and stamped it with a seal. The seal glowed, and a glowing mark appeared on top of the token. You can go to the armory hall with this token. The spiritual seal on it will naturally dissipate in about a day, so you have until tomorrow noon to use it. Wulong nodded and left the place while the retainer turned and beckoned the next person to approach with the same listless face. About an hour after Wulong left the mission hall, a middle-aged man in blue robes indicating a sect elder walked in from the depths of the building with a retainer leading the way. They approached the counter where Wulong had registered his mission. Disciple greets Elder Chen. The retainer behind the counter's expression immediately lost its listless appearance as he stood up and saluted toward the blue-robed man. He was one of the elders in charge of the mission hall. Because sect elders needed their own time to cultivate, they would usually take turns to oversee whatever they were in charge of. There of course would be a senior elder who was above them, but they rarely managed in person and only received reports from and relayed instructions to the elders under them. The blue-robed man nodded to him and asked, "Did disciple Wulong appear here?" The retainer then searched through his records, as he rarely remembered the hundreds of missions he registered in a day, and then respectfully relayed the details of Wulong's registration. Hearing the details, Elder Chen slightly furrowed his brows. The retainer who led the elder here also looked nervous. "It seems you have a bad memory, does the name Wulong not remind you of anything?" he then said in a slightly low but dissatisfied voice to the registering retainer. The retainer first looked puzzled, as he could not comprehend what mistake he had made, and then suddenly came to a realization. About 5 months ago, all people working in the mission hall were told that if a disciple under the name Wulong came to register for a mission, an elder must approve of it before the mission could be confirmed. He then quickly lowered his head, with a bead of sweat going down his forehead. "My apologies, Elder Chen, this little one never saw disciple Wu before, so I have not recognized him. I was told by others that he usually comes with Elder Hai, so he is easy to spot." He spoke visibly shaken. Full W current Nafloes on novelb.in.com. Elder Chen touched his chin, seemingly pondering something. In fact, he also did not expect Wulong to come here and take a mission without anyone accompanying him, as this has not happened even once in the 5 months he was here. Forget it, Elder Hai probably had something to do while he registered, so he sent him alone. "I will take responsibility if this becomes a problem, just be more watchful with your work," he told the retainers. In fact, he also had no clue about Wulong's circumstances. He and the other elders in the mission hall were just asked to keep an eye on him by Elder Hai. Since Wulong has never taken the initiative to take missions or even leave his own living quarters in all of his time in the sect, they also gradually weakened their vigilance. He could not really blame the retainer, since keeping in mind one of the thousands of disciples registering for missions and immediately recognizing him was not something usually required of the ones occupying this position. He himself had long forgotten about Wulong until the retainer who came with him informed him of his appearance in the hall. And like he said out loud, he believed that Elder Hai probably just sent him alone to teach him a little of self-reliance, and was waiting outside the hall. But even if it wasn't like that, the situation already happened, and judging by the amount of time that went by, Wulong is probably long gone from the sect territory. Regardless, Elder Hai did not have a particularly high standing in the sect, so in his view even if something goes wrong he could just apologize or compensate. The retainer sighed with relief when he heard the elder's voice. He then vengefully looked at the retainer who brought Elder Chen along. If he told about Wulong to him, he could have stopped him from leaving or at least reported this personally so that he would not look so bad in the elder's eyes. The other retainer simply sighed with relief to know it wasn't a big deal, since he was genuinely concerned that there could have been a problem when he noticed Wulong leaving the counter with a token. He previously have registered him once, so he knew his appearance. He also thought that Elder Hai was probably nearby, as there was no way that timid disciple who always looked lost would come here without anyone accompanying him, so he hesitated for a long time, but in the end, he could not take it off his mind, as he could potentially be punished if this whole situation went out of control, so he went to Elder Chen, who was in charge today. In fact, this whole situation was anticipated to a certain extent by Wulong. He purposefully and carefully chose the person to register him on the mission, as he did not want to waste time with people preventing him from leaving the sect gates. The previous him would usually be taken to the mission hall by Elder Hai. He also suspected that Elder Hai secretly followed him during the missions outside, but he was not certain, since the previous Wulong did not have that high of a perception to notice someone tailing him. What he knew for certain is that he would always be encouraged to take group missions, with a few other disciples, to gather larger quantities of ingredients a bit further outside than solo missions. Wulong knew that he was an odd existence within the sect, and that there were secrets related to his origin, and Elder Hai who brought him in was most likely not doing it of his own accord, as he noticed a seal on his memories that contained the part prior to arriving to the sect. He currently was not able to investigate it because even with his knowledge and abilities, he needed to at least be in the Qi manifestation realm to be able to use spiritual Qi outside of the body and undo the seal. Chapter 6, The Yin-Yang Unity Palace. At the Armory Hall, he received a standard kit given to the disciples going outside to accomplish missions. There were a few things there. A few fasting pills, which provide sustenance and alleviate hunger. By charming the woman who gave out the gear with his smile and mentioning that he might need to stay outside longer, he received a dozen pills, slightly more than usual. They were easy to make, very cheap, and could be stored for an extremely long time, so the sect could give even hundreds of them without losing profit from the missions these disciples were doing. A leather bag with clear drinking water, which would not be enough for a whole week, but it was expected that in 3 days the water would last. The disciples would be able to find a clear source of water to replenish it. A simple steel sword. The majority of the disciples had their own gear, most would have at least a low-grade spiritual treasure weapon. But since going outside was not completely safe, the sect lent those who did not possess their own weapons these standard weapons. A small dagger usually used to cut vegetation, cut out monster cores or needons out of slain demonic beasts, or perform other random tasks that required a sharp tool. A small jade knife with the blade the size of an index finger used to cut precious medicine, a little jade shovel with the shovel head the size of a human palm if the medicine was of the root type, as well as a separate bag for storing the medicinal ingredients or refining materials. A lightweight cloak with sect insignia and a bamboo hat to shield from wind, rain, and snow, as well as a slightly bigger cloth travel bag to carry them and other things over the shoulder. A small pouch with 5 stink pills in tiny sealed glass flasks that would help in an unlikely case the disciple met a demonic beast stronger than second tier so they could not even run if not for this life-saving tool, or if they unluckily ran into many demonic beasts at once. All of the items except for the fasting pills and stink pills were only lent out and had to be returned upon arriving back at the sect after the mission, and would require points to compensate if lost, damaged, or broken. Full W current Nafloes on novelb.in.com. Wulong put everything besides the bamboo hat, sword, and dagger in the travel bag, and fastened the bag with the rope over his shoulder along with the bamboo hat. He then fastened the sword to his rope sash on one side and the dagger on the other. He proceeded to the sect gates. The only safe way to descend the mountain the sect was on while on foot. On the way, the closer he got to the gates, the more he met people patrolling in grey robes. They were in groups of 7 people, with 6 people in 1st to 6th level Chi condensation realm, a realm higher than Chi gathering, and 1 person in 7th to 9th level Chi condensation realm. He would also occasionally see people in Chi manifestation realm, the realm higher than Chi condensation, wearing grey robes with blue linings. The grey robes identified sect protectors. Similar to sect retainers, when disciples stopped improving for nearly a decade after reaching a realm higher than sect retainers, thus proving that they most likely have reached their maximum potential but have not reached the level of sect elders, they would have to resign as disciples and face a choice to either leave the sect or stay as sect protectors. Sect protectors were the main muscle force of the sect. They manned all guarding positions as well as law enforcement, and played the role of the sect army in times of conflict. Judging by the realms of the disciples, elders, sect retainers, and protectors, Wulong got an estimate of the overall standing of the sect. In his estimation, the Yin-Yang Unity Palace would accept disciples at 7th level of body transformation realm and higher every 10 years. There would be part of the new disciples who directly join the inner court, but most of them would join the outer court. Around 10% of them would inevitably be expelled for breaking rules, lack of talent, or die in accidents. If they manage to break through to the Chi gathering realm in less than a year from being recruited, or they display other unique talents, they may be promoted to inner court disciples, as their talents would be judged as high. There will also occasionally be people demoted from inner court to the outer court due to showing weak results. The only difference between inner court and outer court disciples is talent, as inner court disciples would receive much better resources in their monthly allowances, in hopes that they would soon reach higher realms and become a major strength to the sect. Thus there were outer court disciples that were higher in cultivation to the inner court disciples, but they were lower in standing as with their talents they basically had no hope to break through to the elder level. Every year, the sect would expel some disciples who do not contribute enough through accomplishing missions to keep them from both the inner court and the outer court. As such, the sect at any time has disciples ranging from higher level body transformation realm to Chi manifestation realm. After about 2 decades from the moment of joining, the majority, 55 to 65%, of the disciples in both inner court and outer court in the batch have stopped growing at the Chi gathering for a decade, while their peers have reached higher realms in that time, with some very talented ones reaching revolving Chi realm and becoming elders. The majority of this group will then leave while a tiny minority will stay as sect retainers. After another decade, the absolute majority, 70% 80%, of the remaining disciples from that batch have stopped growing at Chi condensation realm or Chi manifestation realm for a decade, hence either leaving the sect or joining sect protectors, with a small percentage either expelled or dead due to various reasons, while the remaining ones are growing at a very slow pace, eventually reaching revolving Chi realm later and becoming elders. Thus any batch of new disciples would have at most 3 senior generations, each earlier generation exponentially becoming smaller than the later one, with only the generation directly above them somewhat comparable in size to their own. Those above the 3rd generation that still keep growing but are slow are collectively called hidden court disciples, as they are mostly in closed seclusion until they either break through to the elder level or stop growing and fail, thus becoming protectors, and are almost never seen during normal times. Once the small percentage of disciples become elders at the revolving Chi realm, the sect's core grows, and they are able to accept more disciples since there are more people who can mentor the younger generations and the sect grows in size. From Wulong's experience, he speculated that since the sect elders were at the revolving Chi realm, there should be grand elders a realm above them at foundation building realm, as well as a sect master usually a realm higher than grand elders, and in this case should be a core formation realm practitioner. But seeing that the sect only had around 7,000 people with around 2,000 of them being protectors and retainers, and around 500 elder level people, he believed that the sect is rather new, at most 200 years old, or have recently experienced a drastic drop in numbers, which he found no indication of. So it was entirely possible that this new sect appointed grand elders when they reached the peak of revolving Qi realm, and the sect master and perhaps vice-sect master are at the foundation building realm. This would not even count as a sect compared to the backwater he grew up in, which really told a tale about the quality of cultivation in this place. The reason he could easily speculate the higher-ups of the Yin-Yang Unity Palace was because any sect would have basically the same structure, with the difference being the number of realms, the realm at which the sect accepts disciples, and the time frames. For example, a sect he joined in his youth, which was a pretty standard sect, would start accepting disciples only at Qi Gathering Realm every 20 years, have sect retainers at Qi Manifestation Realm, and protectors at Revolving Qi and Foundation Building Realms, elders at Core Formation Realm, Grand Elders at Core Condensation Realm and have a sect master in Mortal Transcendence Realm. In most sects there would also be one or more sect ancestors, the previous generation sect masters in later stages of Mortal Transcendence Realm. Thus such a sect would have from disciples to the sect master practitioners at every major realm of 9 mortal realms except for the first body transformation realm, but the basic structure of how it promoted and allocated its personnel followed the same general logic. And that would be the same for every sect, including ones much higher in level, even immortal sects. As he was trying to figure out where he was by judging the power level of the people around, which in actuality made him more confused as he did not know where in the world a sect at this level and size would be able to survive the vicious competition of the cultivation world, he reached the gates and passed with his mission permit without any problems. He descended the mountain trail for a few hours, sparsely meeting outer patrols and checkpoints of the sect protectors until he reached the foot of the mountain where a beautiful and lush forest filled with spiritual qi sprawled as far as the eye could see, occasionally going up hills and mountains in this enormously vast territory. He traveled through the forest, not following the road that led through the forest from the beginning of the mountain trail to presumably the nearest human settlement, and choosing a direction he traveled on a mission before, though at a pace only slightly higher than a mortal would. Body Transformation Realm Cultivator at the first 3 levels would have only slightly improved strength and endurance compared to a mortal in his prime who have trained all their life, which was already impressive in the eyes of mortals, but quite pathetic in the eyes of even Qi Gathering Realm practitioners who already had superhuman strength, speed and endurance due to being able to gather spiritual qi and store it in their danshan. He moved for a few hours straight until he reached a small spring where he took a little break as his body in his current state had limits, and his strength began declining from his peak. And traveling in a wilderness always required one to try to maintain their peak condition in case of an emergency. On his way he sometimes passed by some outer court disciples gathering medicinal ingredients in the distance. He also slayed a couple of hostile wild beasts he encountered with no difficulty, using one slash of his sword to instantly kill per encounter. Beasts generally were divided into 3 categories of wild beasts, demonic beasts, and spiritual beasts. Those were not the only types of beasts, but the most common ones that could be met. Wild beasts were basically mortal animals with no special powers. There were hostile ones and docile ones. Demonic beasts were ferocious and hostile, and had special abilities. Their body parts were sometimes treated as precious materials, and they occasionally had monster cores and neotons, which was the condensation of their cultivation. They were ranked in grades, tiers, and levels corresponding to the human cultivation levels. For example, all demonic beasts that were comparable to a cultivator in any of the 9 mortal realms were of the mortal grade. Those who were comparable to body transformation realm cultivators were of 1st tier and those who were comparable to 1st to 3rd level of body transformation realm cultivators were low level. Thus, theoretically speaking, Wulong would only be able to go up against low level 1st tier mortal grade demonic beasts. Though, in his memories he could not recall anyone in the sect mentioning the grade of demonic beasts, only tiers and levels, which could imply that there was not even knowledge of demonic beasts above mortal grade. The 3rd and last most common type of beasts, the spiritual beasts, could be treated as more of a races than beasts, as they possess high intelligence, equal or in some cases vastly greater than humans, can cultivate, and at cultivation levels above 9 mortal realms turn into human form. Wulong passed by many medicinal ingredients, but none of them interested him. Let alone him, even his sect would not consider these particularly precious or rare, though they were still valuable and were gathered by disciples in exchange for points. He have yet to encounter a demonic beast in battle, but he sensed quite a lot in the distance. The abundance of spiritual vegetation and demonic beasts only confirmed his doubts. This was indeed a spiritual land. Chapter 7, Fractured World. As cultivators require abundant spiritual qi to cultivate, sects would not be established in a location chosen on a whim. They would be situated in natural spiritual lands, where the spiritual qi was abundant. Such an environment would benefit a sect in several ways. The first one is obviously the abundance of spiritual qi, which made cultivation efficient. The second one is that such spiritual lands would produce an abundance of resources such as medicinal plants, spiritual trees, precious ores, and so on. These could be harvested by the disciples of the sects which are not yet strong enough to take more advanced missions. The sect would receive materials, and the disciples would get achievement points which they could then exchange for cultivation resources. There was no worry that the disciples would not turn in the materials they have gathered, as most of the items required special processing to be consumed or used safely and efficiently. The larger sects would have alchemy halls and forging halls which could use the materials into immediately usable cultivation resources such as pills, elixirs, and medicinal liquids, and tools such as talismans, spiritual treasure weapons, non-weapon spiritual treasure tools and etc. Smaller sects like the Yin-Yang Unity Palace would exchange the raw resources with merchant companies for the useful cultivation resources which they can then distribute either through monthly allowances or in exchange for points. The more senior disciples who can take harder tasks earn the sect money with which it buys even more resources and necessities. They also raise the sect's reputation which causes more people to request missions from the disciples. The third way a spiritual land is benefiting the sect is the natural presence of demonic beasts, which could be hunted by the disciples, both honing their combat skills and allowing them to harvest precious materials from the corpses. And lastly, a spiritual land also can be an easy marker for the sect's boundaries, as every sect regards their spiritual land as their direct sphere of influence. In fact, if an outsider is noticed hunting for treasures in a spiritual land belonging to a sect, it is considered a major offense, and many bloody fights were started between sects because one of the disciples trespassed into the spiritual land of another sect. Therefore, there were no cases in which two sects occupied the same spiritual land. In the vicious cultivation world, competition over resources is bloody and merciless. The higher quality the spiritual land is, the more it is sought and that more strength the sect had to have to hold and protect it. There were countless sects destroyed over a spiritual land. And all sects had greedy eyes on them at all times, since even if there were an enormous amount of them, it was a limited amount, and it was far from being able to satisfy the demand. Hence the puzzlement Wulong felt. How does a sect of this tiny magnitude, low level and low overall strength occupy a spiritual land? It could only mean that the competition was not so fierce and the cultivation world within the easily traversable distances quite peaceful. Another thing that puzzled him was that it indeed was a spiritual land. When he noticed the low quality and amount of spiritual chi in the atmosphere in the sect, he decided that maybe it was because a sect of this means was not able to occupy a spiritual land and was instead situated in some spiritually deficient place instead, but as he confirmed all signs, he understood that his assumption was wrong. Then the quality and amount of spiritual chi outside of the spiritual land had to be barely present. Which meant, this was not a part of the world he knew. A minor world. He then thought to himself. As besides the 7 boundless worlds there were countless minor worlds that existed, and in which most of the lands of mortals were situated. But he quickly discarded this possibility as it was common knowledge that all minor worlds are connected with the 7 boundless worlds forming one enormous system that seemingly lives and breathes. It was impossible for one of the minor worlds to have this much of a gap in quality of the spiritual chi. It can't be, a fractured world. He then expressed disbelief at his own assumption and spoke out loud. Fractured worlds were basically minor worlds that suffered calamitous events in the past, enough to bring them to a brink of destruction. This would cause that world to close off, without the ability to go in or out. Of course, no matter how bad the calamity was or how close it got to destroying that world, it was still inestimably far from actually destroying a minor world. Actual destruction of minor worlds has only happened enough times to count on one hand. But the damage was extensive enough that the link was temporarily shut off. This would explain the doubts he had previously, but he still could not be certain, so he decided to find more information before he would make wild declarations. As he got up to continue traveling after his quick rest, he noticed a presence approaching him from afar. It was a demonic beast at mid-level first tier judging by its aura. A cold smile appeared on his face. He might be pretty weak right now, but he did not fall to the point where he would fear a beast of this level. Soon, a slightly bigger wolf with black fur and lava-like lines over its body sprang out of the bushes and gave out a low growl. It then immediately pounced on Wulong with its jaws, aiming for his neck. Wulong placed his right hand on his sword, and took a step forward and to the right, as he casually took his sword out in a graceful, slightly skewed arc. He then proceeded to move his sword down from the raised position without stopping it midair, as if all he did was draw an arc in the air with the sword. At the end of this motion a few drops of steaming blood flew from the sword blade to the ground, and he sheathed the sword while the wolf landed in 2 halves behind him. The blood of this wolf seemed to be hot, as it started evaporating in mere moments after it was exposed to the air. Scorching heart wolf, regretfully without a core. And it is quite young, as a mature one should be around high-level 2nd tier, he said with a slight regret in his eyes. He then turned in the direction the beast came from and rushed there with nimble movements. Let's see what you've left behind to go and greet me, shall we, he said with a slight smile. This beast traveled not long, but it was an agile creature, so it took Wulong about 15 minutes to travel there. He did not know where exactly the wolf came from, as with the limitations of his current cultivation his spiritual sense was practically non-existent, but he knew the general direction and soon felt the air around him heat up. He traveled a bit further and determined the direction the heat was coming from, adjusted his course and rushed there. Soon the vegetation in the surroundings began to grow sparse, as only heat-loving plants would grow nearer to the source of this high temperature. At last, he got out of the trees and could see a bit into the distance, as there were a few giant boulders in the middle of a land with no trees. In one of the boulders, an orange crystal emitting intense heat was lodged, and 12 wolves similar to the one he slayed were idling around and on the boulders. There was one mid-level, and 4 low-level second tier, the rest were first-tier scorching heart wolves. Up.dfrm novel b, I, n.c, o, m. They were already looking in their direction as they noticed him long ago, and he also was not surprised to see them as he detected their aura as he moved here. Ha! I am sorry to do this since I can sympathize with the situation, he said with a sigh and a wry smile. Seeing a harem around one male made him somehow reluctant to ruin this scene, as he understood how frustrating it was to be interrupted in such situations all too well. However, what he saw next, made him first raise an eyebrow, and then scoff with a cold snort. The male wolf, perhaps having some superior survival instincts, showed fear in his eyes, and with a growl sent all the female wolves at Wulong. The wolves showed reluctance but decided to follow through, as the male wolf retreated slowly, getting ready to run in the opposite direction. Wulong suddenly launched from his standing position, skillfully evading the female wolf's claws and fangs. He ran straight for the male wolf, and unleashed a clean sword strike straight from the sheath which went in a weird arc. The beast evaded only to somehow willingly move in the direction the arc drawn in the air tilted to, effectively shoving its head under the blade. With a thud, its head and body fell separately to the ground, while Wulong ran by him, and with one leg as a pivot turned to look at the now lonely harem. The wolves turned only to see their leader beheaded. Go! Wulong said in a cold voice. Demonic beasts do not understand words, even high-level ones never communicate. They only act instinctively, but they as most living beings have survival instincts, which mean they knew fear. Wulong's words seemed to get the meaning across without any need for mutual language, as the hairy harem quickly rushed off in a random direction, the only requirement being as far as possible from here. In fact, this was not an act of kindness from Wulong, he just felt it tedious to deal with them as he knew that the only one of them to have a demonic core is the male he had slain. There was literally no merit in him pursuing the rest of the pack. His cultivation was also quite low, and his body was not really trained, so his stamina would not allow him to kill them all without exhausting a good 2/3 of it. He flicked off the blood that was emitting intense steam and sheathed the sword, taking out the dagger instead. After approaching the head of the scorching heart wolf, he made a few skillful incisions and took out a perfectly round, slightly translucent red core the size of a hazelnut that felt warm to the touch. A chaotic flow of energy could be seen swirling inside of it, moving according to a mysterious and profound order. Haha, fortune is still favorably looking on me even in this life, such a good harvest within half a day of launching off, not bad, he said with a smile, which quickly turned wry as he thought, to think this is considered good find now. His cultivation technique will allow him to fully absorb this core without worrying about side effects that would usually follow directly absorbing demonic cores. This core was of a yang attribute, so it would not be very beneficial to his cultivation base. But he could temper his body with it. He also knew countless ways to improve his yang qi, and the yang root, which influences the rate at which his body is producing yang qi and the amounts of yang qi that could be stored and shot out. Of course, this core was nowhere sufficient to influence his yang root, but it was sufficient enough to improve his condition a little bit, increasing the effectiveness of the treatment for his broken sword in the future. Improving stamina, endurance, and overall physique also would help him exert a bit more of his strength. The 2 movements he made killing 2 scorching heart wolves may have seemed effortless, but it was in fact very taxing on his current untrained and untempered body, so much so that he was currently sore all over. He looked at the crystal lodged into the boulder, and shook his head. It might be a treasure, but it is useless to me as it will lose its effects once taken out from the boulder which connects it to the source of its power deep underground, he mumbled, not particularly sad. Well, I can at least use its effects a bit while I am here. Wulong sat in a lotus position and took a fasting pill, and then proceeded to take out the leather water bag and take a few sips. Hunger, he laughed at his needs. Once he cleared out his thoughts caused by his mortal needs, he took out the demonic core, wiped it a bit with a cloth even though it was already clean, and swallowed it in one go. His stomach immediately started producing scorching heat that began to course through his whole body as he started cultivating. His skin flared up, turning red and even emitting slight steam. He sat like that for around 5 hours, absorbing the spiritual qi that was influenced by the crystal above him, keeping up the temperature that was given by the demonic core. Gradually, his flared-up skin returned to normal, and once all signs of the previous state disappeared, he opened his eyes that flickered with a profound light. Good, now I don't need to worry that my arm will fall off because I moved around with a sword a bit, he said with a smile. Chapter 8, The Way of the Sword. His cultivation did not rise, but his physique improved a lot considering what a sorry state his body was in before. It could be said that he made great progress just from that core alone. He also used a profound technique to improve the quality of his yang qi in preparation for the future. The condition of his slumbering dragon improved as well, although there were no apparent changes, the effectiveness of the treatment in the future would increase. As it was already night, he used a technique he once learned in the beginning of his journey as a rogue cultivator, when he still had the need to sleep but could not be at ease as rogue cultivators make good targets. This technique helped one to sleep while keeping the body in a ready-to-move state as well as allowing for increased vigilance. It is a technique not necessary for someone who achieved core formation realm and above, where a cultivator can completely discard the need to sleep, eat and drink, so he had not used it in who knows what time, but it was a neat technique nonetheless and he once went through great lengths just to obtain it. He sat in a lotus position with his eyes closed, sleeping. In fact he was not really worried about security as he knew that there were practically no beasts for a long distance from this place, and even if some approached, not all beasts would like this heat. If any other fire alignment beasts were present in the vicinity they would be constantly fighting over this territory with the scorching heart wolves, so they would have approached the moment there was an abnormality here. As for the wolves, although their intelligence is pretty low their perception of danger and survival instincts is extremely high as demonstrated by their behavior in their encounter. They ran in such a fright that they probably have not stopped running away even now. The young male that attacked him first is more of an exception as it was inexperienced and prone to impulsive behavior due to immaturity. Over the next 2 days Wulong traveled further into the depths of the spiritual land, but he was not as lucky as on the first day and was not able to find anything useful for himself. While he took breaks, he also casually collected a few stalks of white spirit grass at a time to eventually bring back at least a decent amount for the mission. He made sure to cut it at the base with the jade knife so that the root remained intact and unharmed by being cut with metal. It was a great taboo in the world of cultivation to completely destroy a spiritual treasure, and the tools his current sect provided were given precisely because of that. Though this type of medicinal plant was not rare, and would naturally pop up in the spiritual land, it was more a force of a habit for him to treat any medicinal plant carefully. He also spotted and harvested a few ingredients that could be exchanged for a decent amount of points just in case he needed them. He killed any demonic beasts that attacked him, but as most of them were first-tier beasts, there were no cores, only materials he didn't care about. He did have a barbecue with the meat of a 3-horned bull, which benefited his body tempering a bit further though. On the 4th day, he encountered an opportunity. Wulong stood on a long wall-like cliff overseeing a slightly lower plain. There was a bright blue flower that emitted a gentle blue glow growing on a mound in the middle of a rocky clearing. There was a high-level second-tier blue-tongue purple lizard, a giant lizard covered densely in thick purple scales that gave off a metal luster, lazily lying a few meters away from it. I won't be able to cut it with technique alone, as the sword just is not hard and sharp enough to cut its hide, Wulong thought as he observed the lizard down the cliff. Blue-tongue purple lizard is a highly toxic and heavily armored beast, so the quality of his sword would not be enough to cut it no matter how skillfully he used it, and he was not able to manifest and use spiritual chi outside the body to assist the sword in cutting it. If he had that ability he wouldn't even need the sword to deal with it as he could easily cut it with a hand. Do I have to use sword intent? But with my current body, it is quite taxing. I will have to make sure I do not need to fight right after Nov, L, by, N, com. He came to a decision and spent a few hours scouting the situation around. The blue-tongue purple lizard did not move but was getting restless since it noticed someone snooping around. However, it did not dare to go into attack as the flower could be stolen when it was gone. After double-checking that he would not need to fight off any other threats after dealing with the lizard he approached the clearing. Shea. When he got out of the trees and bushes surrounding the clearing the lizard stood up and issued a warning hiss, its blue tongue occasionally appearing in a snaking motion. Wulong calmly took out his sword and closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, seemingly not caring about the lizard. The beast did not miss this chance and rushed towards him with a surprising agility as it did not look that agile from its form. When it was just about a few meters from him, Wulong suddenly opened his eyes and a sharp aura enveloped the space for a split moment. The lizard abruptly stopped moving, as stiff as if it was frozen in time. The surrounding turned unnaturally silent for a second, as if all sounds were severed and time slowed down to a crawl. A gust of wind blew by as the sounds returned, and the lizard's head split in two, the wound as smooth as a mirror. Any other animal would in fact be carried by inertia as it lost control and fall forward, but because of the unique leg movement of this lizard which effectively killed all speed with each step and jump-started it for the next step, allowing it to keep the center of its mass always stable and thus instantly stop at any point in time without being influenced by its own momentum. Normally such immense control over its movements would be a strength but now it played a small part in its demise, as Wulong made his move precisely at the moment the lizard killed its momentum from one step and was preparing for the next one, which happened in a fraction of a second. This amplified the effectiveness of Wulong's attack. Wulong, on the other hand, broke into sweat all over his body, weakness and numb pain assaulting all of his muscles. There was also a sharp pain in the entire arm he held his sword with up to his shoulder and even down to the shoulder blade. He placed his other hand on a tree he was standing by to support himself, as he gasped for breath. Phew, that was risky. He muttered with a slight chuckle. Sword intent was not strictly dependent on cultivation or the degree of body tempering, it was an obscure type of power that stemmed from one's understanding of the sword. One had to go through unimaginable lengths training with the sword or have a miraculously talented master who is unparalleled at teaching and whose understanding of the sword reached greater heights than one could imagine to even begin understanding sword intent, much less use it. Wulong, Having all of his memories, experiences, knowledge, and understandings naturally could use it. But having said that it does not depend on cultivation base and body didn't mean it did not place a heavy burden on him. In fact, it was quite crazy to use the lowest power of sword intent even in chi gathering realm, let alone body tempering realm. However, his sword would not be able to pierce its armor otherwise. He also currently did not have any ability to manifest spiritual chi outside the body, making it impossible for him to enhance the cutting ability of the sword with sword techniques using spiritual chi, so he only could use this dangerous method to deal with it quickly. Wulong then looked at the corpse before him with a strange expression on his face. Not even the whole body, hey? He thought as he only managed to split its head instead of dividing it in half. Well, at least I don't have to worry about cultivating here, as this poor bastard's territory is quite vast and no other beasts dare to come even near it. He then sheathed his sword. While he used a sword this time, it was only because his cultivation was insufficient. To use sword intent at his level of sword mastery he usually didn't even need a weapon. As he took out the dagger, he placed one hand on one of the scales at the side of the lizard, and with a slight grunt, as his body was still hurting all over, flipped it on its back, revealing larger, armor-like scales on its back. Using the dagger to work through the wound he made to its head down the neck to its stomach while detaching those larger scales from within. When he made his way to a certain part of the stomach, Wulong cut into the meat and soon took out a white ball with purple veins all over it looking like a marble ball. This was the blue-tongue purple lizard's neodon. It was highly toxic and would normally need to be purified before it could be used. He did all that all the while enduring the burden he put on himself using the sword intent, so he was still pained and slightly out of breath. The reason he needed to do it quick even if he had to postpone recovering, was because the neodon would be drained of its energy by he corpse if it stayed inside much longer. He put away the neodon and sighed with relief knowing that the urgent matters were done. Chapter 9, Yin-Yang Conversion Cauldron Body. When Wulong recovered his breathing a little, he sat not far from the flower. After taking a fasting pill and sipping some water, he meditated a little to calm down and restore the spiritual chi that he was nearly completely exhausted by exerting his body to that extent. 2 hours later, he recovered enough to cultivate, and gently harvested the flower with the jade knife. A low-level 4th-tier mortal-grade medicine, I guess for this place it is quite a rare find. Just like demonic beasts, medicines as well as spiritual treasures, pills and materials also had their classifications. What was common for them all was the grade, which always corresponded to the 9 great realms. So any of them that were mainly useful to cultivators in the great realm of 9 mortal realms would be mortal grade, for the great realm of 7 profound realms would be profound grade, for 5 origin realms would be origin grade, and so on. And just like the demonic beasts, there were tiers and levels to these ingredients that followed the same logic. The number of tiers in any grade was set to the number of major realms in the great realm the grade corresponded to. And each tier was divided into 3 levels of low, mid, and high, which corresponded to first 3, second 3 and last 3 minor realms in each major realm. If I could use alchemy right now, I could at least double the potency, if not triple, considering there might be the right ingredients nearby, but oh well, he said as he looked at the flower. A low-tier mid-level mortal-grade medicine such as this flower would normally be appropriate to consume for at least chi manifestation realm practitioners, and would be suicidal for someone in body transformation realm, not to mention it required to be processed and made into a pill to be safe to consume. But with his cultivation technique he had no qualms, and was sad that he could not enhance its effects instead. This flower was of the yin attribute, and male cultivators would not be able to consume it. But as a double cultivator, what Wulong needed is exactly yin chi to increase his cultivation base in the way he was most accustomed to. It is just that normally even dual cultivator male practitioners were unable to directly consume a yin attribute medicine, and had to absorb the yin chi from the female partner. What Wulong was going to do was use a peculiar technique he once learned to absorb this yin attribute medicine. He could not of course consume something of extreme yin attribute with this technique, but just a yin attribute medicine was doable. Ha, what a waste! He sighed and thought as a graceful figure with a sword appeared in his mind. In truth, most of the benefits of this medicine would be lost, as this method was far from perfect. He would ideally help his partner increase the quality of their yin chi and / or if possible yin root with such yin attribute or extreme yin attribute medicines and receive full benefits for both his partner and himself during dual cultivation, but as that was not available right now and he urgently needed to increase his strength, he could not have lot of scruples. In fact, with the chaos refining body tempering art he could potentially directly absorb the energy in it without much of a waste, but there was a catch to it. Chaos refining meant that he could refine any type of energy to use for himself without suffering the side effects. But yin-type medicine enhancing feminine qualities of the body was not a side effect but its benefit for all intents and purposes. So if he used chaos refining body tempering art to consume this flower and not the technique he was preparing to use, which would waste a lot of the medicine's potential, he could indeed get greater benefits from it, but it would enhance his body towards feminine traits, which he absolutely was not willing to allow. So he prepared the technique called the yin-yang conversion cauldron body, which would albeit wastefully use this yin medicine to enhance his cultivation. He took out a few berries he collected earlier, planning to exchange them for quite a lot of points, from the sack. These berries were of the yang attribute. He did not anticipate he would need them, but yin-yang conversion cauldron body required the male user to have yang medicine to consume yin medicine, and female users to have yin medicine to consume yang medicine. The auxiliary medicine was not required to be as potent as the target medicine, so these berries would do the trick. He also took out a bamboo slice he cut on his second day while passing through a bamboo trove, as he figured he might need it for such occasions, and split it in half, getting 2 half-cylinder plates. He stashed one of them, placing the flower into the other plate. He then placed a few stalks of white spirit grass as well as a few other plants, and crushed them with the jade handle of the jade knife into a herbal paste. It was awkward using such crude tools, but it was not particularly troubling for him, as there was a time where he had to survive with such means before. When he got his herbal paste, he drained the liquid into one corner of his bamboo bowl by tilting it and pressing the herbal paste with the jade knife handle on the higher side. Nov. L. By. N. Com. Taking the paste drained of most liquid out of the bamboo bowl, he rolled it into a ball shape roughly resembling a slightly bigger pill with his hands. Placing the herbal liquid in the bamboo bowl and the berries on a big leaf he took out prior, he meditated for a few seconds in lotus position to clear his mind and enter optimal condition. He then took the berries and started eating them one by one in quick succession. The first berry was like a spark and his stomach quickly began to heat up, as each additional berry was like fuel further invigorating the fire started by the first berry. Wulong took a few minutes to circulate his technique to ensure that his body was in the condition he needed, and then in a very slow pace drank the medicinal liquid from the bamboo bowl tiny drop by tiny drop. Each drop produced a violent sparkling reaction in his stomach, as if cold water was sprinkling on a heated oil, as he gradually changed the circulation of his technique and increased the volume of the drops he was sipping by tiny increments. As his stomach was producing intense energy that circulated in a profound way throughout his body, he finished drinking the medicinal liquid and cultivated silently for about half an hour, until at a certain point he suddenly took and gulped down the herbal ball. And at the moment the herbal ball entered his stomach, he also changed the circulation pattern of his technique as well as the intensity, rushing at the maximum speed. There was a small sound of explosion from his body, and an enormous amount of energy was produced by the reaction in his stomach, as he struggled to keep this much energy from blowing him apart. All of his veins became visible and bulged as if on the verge of bursting, his skin turned red, and sweat gushed from all over his body. Steam began rising from him and his every muscle was twitching and spasming. He then began using a pattern of hand seals that did not contain any spiritual chi and were designed to control the processes in the physical body by altering the blood flow in hands. The pattern contained 48 hand seals that he changed with specific speed for each seal, which he then repeated after going through the whole pattern over and over again. His breathing also was in a repeating pattern of slow and fast breaths. He cultivated like that until noon of the next day. A profound ripple would occasionally spread from him as he broke through to the next minor realm. At the moments of breakthroughs, the wounds he created by using sword intent with such a weak body healed at a visible rate, and his body was constantly being tempered and transformed by the spiritual chi. When he opened his eyes, his cultivation had gone up to the 6th level of body transformation realm. He went up 3 whole minor realms in one day. Not to mention that he had to cross the threshold of going from 3rd level to 4th level, which was one of the minor walls in each of the major realms. The other one being going from the 6th to the 7th level. He then took out the blue-tongue purple lizard's neodon and swallowed it, starting another cultivation session, this time purely with chaos refining body tempering art. After several hours he broke through to the 7th level and his physique received a major boost, his body tempering achieving consecutive breakthroughs. Now, even though his cultivation was still not sufficient, with sheer physical body endurance he could use sword intent without taking so much risk, granted that he did not use more than the lowest level he displayed against the lizard. Experiencing a dramatic leap in strength, he could not make breakthroughs for some time, as he had to consolidate his achievements, lest it would make his foundation unstable. He was also starting to run low on fasting pills. He could of course just kill edible demonic beasts and roast them for sustenance, but he originally planned to only stay outside for a week at most, to not cause an uproar by disappearing. So even if his main goal of finding a suitable natural treasure to repair his broken sword was not accomplished, he was still pretty satisfied with his harvest. He now at least had some assurance and power to defend himself in case of something going wrong. With his increased speed he could reach the sect back in around a day, as he traveled 3 days in this direction. So he decided to detour and go back using a different route from the one he came here with, while keeping an eye out for a possible lucky encounter. Although it would take him slightly longer, he wanted to try his luck again. Chapter 10, In the Rain. The day after, as he already approached the vicinity of the sect, he noticed the humidity levels rising as well as the clouds that have been growing denser since morning floating lower to the ground. He took out the cloak and put it around his shoulders, and put the bamboo hat on his back over the head, fastening it with the ribbons under his chin, feeling slightly nostalgic and mysteriously somehow wondrous. Since immortals would usually shield themselves from any natural phenomena like rain or snow, cold and heat with a domain of spiritual chi, resembling a bubble, he forgot how it felt to make preparations such as these. Not long after, the sky started showering the earth with raindrops. Wulong stopped in a clearing and just stood there, taking in the feeling of water droplets gently tapping the bamboo hat he was wearing and the cloak on his shoulders. He listened as the rain washed over everything, eventually falling to the ground, forming puddles of water that then turned into tiny streams. This long-forgotten experience of feeling the rain so close and directly was for some reason very enjoyable. He stretched out his hand from under the cloak slightly, only enough for half of his palm to escape the shielding the bamboo hat created, allowing the raindrops to fall on his hand. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The sound of the rain was relaxing and the distinct fragrance one heard when standing in the rain was calming his mind. The cool water droplets touching his hand's skin were soothing and enjoyable. Being mortal again, he experienced something new. Although it could be argued that it was not a new experience because he was mortal once in the distant past and felt these sensations then, there was a distinct difference as he was experiencing them as the current Wulong, so the feelings and thoughts he gained were unique to this moment in time and could not be brushed off as the same ones he had before. They could not be called better or worse, simply different. As Wulong was lost in the moment, on a distant mountain cliff was a girl wearing the disciple robes of the Yin-Yang Unity Palace standing in the rain and looking into the distance. If she were standing in the streets of any town nearby she would be recognized as a top beauty, but by the sect standards of this peculiar sect that included heavy considerations into one's appearance when selecting disciples she would be about average. And despite the beauty, she was shockingly not memorable. In fact, the reality of her standing there was quite blurry as one would only notice her if they specifically looked for her. If any sect disciples were to be nearby, they would not notice her. Despite standing in the rain without any cover, no raindrops fell onto her, as if the raindrops were naturally avoiding her, afraid to taint her existence. There was also no spiritual chi fluctuations or dome around her, indicating that she was not shielding herself. In her eyes, that looked ordinary at first glance but if examined closely felt as if piercing through any lies and seeing all truths, were mixed emotions of longing, as if there was something she wanted, envy, as if that something was in someone else's possession, and interest, as if she was studying how that someone obtained it. This was the second time she looked like that this week, as just a few days ago she was standing near the sect training fields and was staring at a handsome disciple who seemed dazed with the same intense envy. After some more time, she slowly stretched out her hand, and took a deep breath while closing her eyes. The raindrops that avoided her started to fall on the tip of her jade-like palm, and she took a deep breath. She stood there for a few moments, eventually opening her eyes that now contained a slight puzzlement looking at her palm that was covered in rainwater. She shifted her eyes to look back into the distance, a hint of a smile appearing on her lips. This smile created an indescribable charm around her, as she looked on with eagerness and anticipation. Wulong spent a few dozen minutes just taking in the wondrous feeling, when he noticed that there were multiple presences approaching him. The direction the presences were coming from was different than where he came from, but that was because of the arc he made in his route, as the direction the presences were moving to, they were the same as his destination, the mountain trail entrance of the Yin-Yang Unity Palace. Wulong continued to try to preserve the feeling that was rapidly fading as his attention was instinctively following the presences that were approaching him. He soon recognized that the disruptors of his peaceful moment were human, and were coming in two slightly scattered groups, one was behind the other. The main cluster would pass some distance from him, but two people would directly collide with him if they continued moving straight. There also gradually emerged indistinct sounds of swords clashing and shouting voices coming from the two main groups in the distance. When the first person approached his location, they were greeted by a beautiful sight of a young man standing in the rain with a hand stretched out of his cloak to feel the drops of water as if taken out of a masterpiece painting. Although the bamboo hat would often obscure the face of the wearer, his handsomeness could be identified from the lower part of his face that was visible. The person who arrived was dumbfounded to see the scene but also recognized the insignia on Wulong's cloak. "Hurry and get away from here, it is not safe here, we are being chased," a female voice called out to him. At this point Wulong retrieved his hand to the cloak, opened his eyes and looked at the approaching figure with a slightly dissatisfied expression, allowing her to see his face, to which she responded with widening of her eyes. The first disruptor of the tranquil moment was an exceptionally beautiful young woman in white robes. The robes were of the same design as what Wulong was currently wearing, but instead of the yellow linings, ornaments and sash she had blue ones with gold threaded lines sprinkled into the blue and a few extra ornaments that other disciple robes in the sect didn't have. As he did not recall seeing this type of uniform, he was able to roughly guess her status as a rarely seen and highly valued core disciple. But despite her illustrious status she was in quite a sorry state now, as she was soaking wet from rain, her robes tattered, stained with blood and dirt in many places. Though the blood did not seem to be hers as there appeared to be no wounds on her. She was in the first level of Chi manifestation realm, quite a high realm considering she was only a little over 20. But despite her high cultivation she did not give out a feeling of pressure, which was quite common in the Yin-Yang Unity Palace, as while they do train combat prowess, it is not the main focus of the sect members. Wulong lowered his hat again so his appearance was not apparent. Seeing Wulong not move after her warning she grunted in frustration and stopped not far from him. "Hey, do you hear me? I'm saying that you might get hurt as. Up.dfrm novel b, I, n.c, o, m. She stopped speaking as the second person wearing black robes with scarlet red linings, ornaments, and sash with gold threaded linings that seemed remarkably similar to the ones on the robe of the female disciple before despite the complete difference in the design of the robes, arrived at Wulong's location and stopped at a distance from them. His cultivation base was in the 8th level of Qi condensation realm and he too looked relatively young. There was an ox-tailed sword, Nio Wadeo, a type of Chinese curved single-bladed heavy weapon with a broader tip, in his hand that looked slightly larger and heavier than usual. While his cultivation was significantly lower than the female core disciple, he gave much stronger pressure indicating that he was focusing on combat prowess. There would occasionally be people like these too, while others would take decades cultivating to that realm, they would achieve it in years. A mortal sect would occasionally have from 1 to about 5, if it was a big sect, of those people, that was how rare they are, if talking about the mortal world. These are people with high cultivation talent that would essentially be guaranteed to reach the highest cultivation realms of their environment. Although, the higher the cultivation environment, the more this talent becomes common, as even higher cultivation talent would be required to reach the heights there. But in the environment that they are destined to dominate, they are always called superior talents. Suddenly, a signal flare went up from where the main group was. It seems they judged that they were in a close enough range for the signal to be noticed from the sect despite the weather. A few moments later, a second signal with a slightly different burning pattern, color, and sound went up from the direction of the sect indicating that the sect protectors took notice of the situation. Seeing this signal, the expression of the man in black robes darkened and the female core disciple sighed in relief instead.